Nietzsche, the psychology of power versus the psychology of guilt. Nietzsche was not only an unacknowledged psychologist, he was also a merciless critic of psychology itself. He saw how psychology, instead of uncovering truths about human nature, had been corrupted into an instrument of moral control. He did not simply reject traditional psychology, he declared it a crime against life itself. Because modern psychology, much like religion before it, had become a machine for breeding guilt, for moralizing human instincts, for taming the strong and turning life itself into a sickness. Psychology, a science for a weapon. Most people think of psychology as a science, a neutral, objective pursuit of truth about the human mind. But Nietzsche saw something else. He saw a trap, a subtle deception, a discipline that often pretends to be neutral while in reality reinforcing inherited moral prejudices. Consider two perspectives on psychology. 1. The traditional view. Psychology is an objective field that studies human thoughts, emotions, and behaviors using scientific methods. 1. It aims to help people understand themselves, overcome mental struggles, and live better lives. 2. Nietzsche's view. Psychology has been hijacked by moralists, priests, and power seekers who use it to shape people's thinking in ways that benefit the weak and control the strong. 2. It is not just a tool for understanding, it is a tool for breeding obedience. Which is true? Perhaps both. Psychology has certainly made breakthroughs, helping us understand cognitive biases, emotional trauma, and the complexity of human behavior. But Nietzsche would argue that these discoveries are rarely used to empower individuals. Instead, they are used to tame and pacify them. Consider how modern psychology often frames human behavior. 1. Ambition is rebranded as narcissism. 2. Pride is labeled arrogance. 3. Happiness is treated as dangerous hedonism. 4. Pain is seen as a failure rather than as fuel for strength. The will to power is ignored in favor of theories of trauma and victimhood. To Nietzsche, this is not psychology, it is psychologica, a distorted, value-laden version of psychology designed not to liberate, but to condition. The three faces of psychology. Nietzsche used three distinct terms when discussing psychology. 1. Psychology, the objective science of human motivation and behavior, free from moral bias. 2. Psychologica, a biased interpretation of human nature shaped by religious, cultural, and moral agendas. 3. Psychologists, the speculative, often fraudulent application of psychological theories to history, morality, and religion. Psychologica is where psychology becomes a tool of manipulation. It is what allowed the priests to invent the concept of sin. It is what allows modern psychology to classify strong emotions as disorders and passivity as mental health. Psychologists, meanwhile, is even more dangerous. It allows people to reinterpret history, moral values, and human nature through the lens of their own agenda. 1. Religious leaders used psychologists to reinterpret Jesus as a moral saint rather than a radical rebel. 2. Modern therapists use psychologists to frame human struggle as pathology rather than as necessary for greatness. 3. Political ideologies use psychologists to rewrite history, turning complex figures into simplistic heroes or villains. This is why Nietzsche declared, "All the means by which one has so far attempted to make mankind moral were through and through immoral," because the very tools used to understand and improve humanity have been poisoned by hidden motives. The psychology of guilt and punishment. Nietzsche saw how psychology, just like religion, was being used as a machine of guilt, teaching people that 1. Pain is not innocent, it must be a sign of punishment. 2. Strong emotions, triumph, pride, assertiveness are sins. 3. Self-sacrifice, obedience, and meekness are virtues. And what is the result? A psychology of prevention, a system that tells people to live timidly, to obey the rules, to fear their own power. Consider two interpretations of suffering. 1. The Christian psychological view. Suffering is a result of sin, wrongdoing, or psychological trauma. 1. It is something to be avoided, treated, or atoned for. 2. The Nietzschean view. Suffering is a necessary condition for growth. 2. It is not a punishment, but a raw, amoral force of nature that can either crush or elevate a person. Which interpretation is correct? That depends on what kind of person you want to be. If you want to be comforted, choose the first. If you want to be transformed, choose the second. The great blunders and crimes of psychology. Nietzsche outlined 3 levels of psychological failure. 1. Naive blunders. False dichotomies like altruism versus egoism, pleasure versus pain, good versus evil. 2. Tremendous blunders. The glorification of consciousness and soul and spirit as if they are separate from the instincts and body. 3. Great crimes. Teaching people that suffering is their fault, that pain must mean guilt, that ambition is dangerous, that happiness is a sin. And what is the consequence? A weak humanity, afraid of itself, cut off from its instincts, ashamed of its own power. A psychology that does not free, but shackles. Nietzsche's true psychology, a psychology of power. If this is the psychology we have inherited, then what is the alternative? Nietzsche offers us a new psychology, one that does not teach submission, but strength. A psychology that, 1. Frees us from guilt, rather than deepens it. 2. Affirms pleasure, rather than represses it. 3. Encourages self-overcoming, rather than self-sacrifice. 4. Values struggle, rather than avoiding it. The goal of Nietzsche's psychology is not to make men accountable, but to make them powerful. It is a psychology that, 1. Refuses to see suffering as punishment. 2. Refuses to see happiness as dangerous. 3. Refuses to breed obedience, timidity, and fear. It is a psychology of war, not peace. A psychology of transformation, not preservation. Are you ready for Nietzsche's psychology? This is the question Nietzsche leaves us with. Are you strong enough to abandon the comforting illusions of guilt and punishment? Are you ready to see psychology for what it is, a battlefield, not a sanctuary? Are you prepared to embrace struggle rather than escape it? If so, then let us begin.